Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. House of the Dragon Season 3 finale just aired, so now it's time to talk about Season 4. This will be my top 10 WTF predictions video. There are a bunch of changes they have already made to the Fire and Blood book that they're adapting for House of the Dragon, so I will try to incorporate all those changes they have made into the video and how that's going to affect Season 4. There's still a lot of stuff that they have not done from the Fire and Blood book yet during the Dance of the Dragons, and remember, this is meant to be the last season of the show. There will be no Stranger Things Conformity Gate with secret episodes happening or anything like that. They plan Season 4 to be the final season heading into it. But based on a lot of the things that Ryan Condal has said about the show over these past couple of seasons, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually stop short of the end of Fire and Blood and they don't cover everything that happens after the dance itself. Because the actual story of the Dance of the Dragons that they're adapting for Fire and Blood actually goes well beyond the stories of a lot of major characters on the show, and I think the show itself is just meant to stop when those characters' stories in particular are done. So prepare yourselves that they might wind up cutting out a lot of really big stuff from the very end of the book story. But careful for spoilers for Season 3 episodes that just got done releasing. Ryan Condal, the showrunner, gave a bunch of interviews recently talking about new characters, new dragons, new locations in Season 4, and even more book changes from Fire and Blood that they're adapting for the episodes. So we'll start our list with those parts that he talked about first. Number 10, the new dragons Ryan Condal was talking about doing on the show are most likely dragons we've only seen a little bit from and only have been referenced. I don't think he was exclusively speaking of dragons we had never seen before. This means more Dreamfire, not just in a dragon dream, but full, like actual in the flesh. We saw her briefly when Aemond was trying to claim a dragon in the Dragonpit before the time jump in Season 1. She and a lot of these other new dragons Ryan Condal was probably talking about are living inside the Dragonpit right now this season, which is why we haven't seen much of them, because we haven't been inside the Dragonpit since Season 1. The Dragonpit itself is going to be a really important location in Season 4. There's Taxis, little Joffrey's dragon, who's too small to ride, but bigger than a dog, still able to roast people and fly on his own, big enough to be a threat. The current smallest dragon capable of fighting in a battle with a rider is Daeron's Tessarion, to give you an idea of how big a dragon needs to be for them to be able to be ridden into battle like that. She's much bigger than Taxis. I know there's going to be a ton of questions about what happened to Daeron. The actor who plays Daeron kind of signed off a little bit, like, oh, thank you so much for letting me be part of this, but we didn't actually see him die on the show. So you do wonder what happened to him and what happened to Tessarion. Please, House of the Dragon, do not kill them off screen. Please let them be alive, at least in Episode 1, which I think that they will, to pay off the Dragonseeds storyline at the end of the Battle of Tumbleton. Even the main HBO social account was getting in on the Daeron jokes, like, has anybody checked on Daeron? How is he doing? How is mommy's precious boy doing?
Is it secret? Is it safe?
The other new dragons that we haven't really seen before are Morgul and Shrykos, who are even smaller. That's young Jaehaerys' dragon, Helena's daughter with Aegon, and baby Jaehaerys' dragon before he was killed by Blood and Cheese. His dragon is still alive and still living in the Dragonpit. There's Stormcloud, baby Aegon III's dragon, Rhaenyra's oldest son with Daemon. We haven't seen that, they didn't really address what happened to them in Season 3, so we will find out what happened to them during Season 4, they'll pay that subplot off from the books. There's the much larger wild dragon, the Cannibal, who's even bigger than Sheepstealer, to give you an idea of how big he is, who originally roosted on Dragonstone in the books, but Sheepstealer also lived on Dragonstone in the books along with Greycoats, so they might also change this for the other wild dragons too, and you see them in different places around the realm, around this area. But the other new one they'll probably introduce is Greycoats. They'll probably do all the wild dragons by the end of Season 4. Number 9, the new characters Ryan Condal said that they're doing, starting with the biggest one, is the Shepherd character, a very important character. There have been a lot of theories about who it's going to be since Season 1, but I think it's going to be one of the bigger book changes that they make, that Ryan Condal is just giving this storyline to another existing major character that's already on the show that we've been watching episode to episode. Same exact thing that he did with the Nettles storyline, giving it to Rhaenyra, turning her into Book Nettles. My early theory here is this is why they changed Mysaria's story from the books in Season 3 so much. Rhaenyra tries to fire her and send her girlfriend to the east so she doesn't have to talk to her anymore. What a way to ghost your ex. Mysaria then ducks her castle guard, trying to force her on her ship, and listens to Rhaenyra's big speech at the Sept about how she's the prince who was promised, using High Valyrian gender-fluid terms to soft launch that she identifies more as a man, not as a woman. They actually confirmed this in the behind the scenes on the show too, that over time Rhaenyra felt like the realm hated the idea of a woman on the Iron Throne so much that she stopped identifying as a woman and tried to present herself more and more manly ways, the way she dressed, the way she acted. By the time you get to her in the armor here, full war paint version of Rhaenyra. This is also one of the reasons why she spoke the prophecy to the small folk in High Valyrian, even though they didn't understand what she was saying because they don't speak High Valyrian. The High Valyrian language doesn't have different words for male or female, it's a gender-neutral language, so when they read the prophecy, it could be either the prince or the princess who was promised, which is why the original Game of Thrones series, everybody was always wondering if it was going to be Jon Snow or Daenerys. Now, the House of the Dragon show has definitely planted their flag in the sand as to who that was, but that's also another book change that they've introduced for the show that George R. R. Martin kind of complains about all the time, like he complains about all the big book changes. What I'm talking about specifically is on the show, Daemon is given the Weirwood vision by the three-eyed raven from the future that it's Daenerys in the future, and also on Helena's tapestry that she was weaving, it is also Daenerys hatching the three dragons, so the show really wants you to feel like Daenerys is meant to be the prince who was promised. This is why when we talk about episodes, we analyze episodes, you have to talk about TV show canon versus book canon because usually they're two completely different things. There are some things from the books that the show does adapt one-to-one, but most of it changes in some big way. And speaking of changes, this is why I think the show is just going to turn Mysaria into the shepherd character from the book, and they might even have a couple different characters share the title so that no one character is the shepherd, preventing Rhaenyra's men from learning who it really is and stopping them. Maybe Sylvie becomes the other shepherd, and that was what the whole scene with Mysaria in the Iron Throne Room was all about during Season 3, where she said that Mysaria wasn't listening to the small folks' problems anymore. Like, you don't care about us, you turned into the kind of person that you used to hate. And maybe they just prop up another fake shepherd and somebody with one hand, and Mysaria just winds up being the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, like she's the real shepherd. Number 8, because the shepherd is the chief architect in the books of the storming of the Dragonpit, which is a very, very important thing in this part of the timeline. Helaena saw it in her dragon dream, burning the small folk, riding and trying to enter it with a very haunting sounding Dracarys because she didn't want to burn anyone, and she was doing this anyway to protect the dragons in her dragon dream. At least we got to see her ride Dreamfire once, even if it was in a dream. The storming of the Dragonpit is meant to be the culmination of the small folks' rebellion against the monarchy, led by the shepherd who gassed them up to do it as a way to eliminate what the small folks saw as the Targaryen source of power, their dragons, because at this point, things have gotten so bad in King's Landing that they feel like the monarchy, the Targaryens, don't care about them at all, so this is their way of getting back at them. They try to kill all their dragons in the Dragonpit, thinking that it will rid them of the threat of Targaryens. And on the show, this is why they slowly showed Rhaenyra during Season 3 caring less and less about the small folk until eventually she stops holding court for their petitions despite the increased violent crimes in the city and them all starving. You have to remember that the small folk have not had food all season, with no signs of things getting better, also because Ormund Hightower was trying actively to make things worse in the city, destabilizing her position, and it was working spectacularly. Like, we make fun of Ormund Hightower for all of his weird eccentricities. He may have died with a knife up his butt, roasted by a Silverwing, but he did do a very good job of sowing chaos for Rhaenyra in King's Landing. Helena's vision burning the small folk, stopping them from storming the Dragonpit, is meant to be a possible future had she not died, which she also wove her death into the tapestry, meaning that she also saw her death too. Dragon dreams are like Daenerys' visions in the House of the Undying. A lot of them are potential futures based on the actions you take, not like 100% certainty as to what will happen, so they're not meant to be future-proof. Helaena saw many outcomes, and she just chose the one where she died. But in another version of this, she lived and eventually stopped the small folk from killing all the dragons, meaning that she is now not there to stop them and they can storm the Dragonpit. You also remember during Season 3, Rhaenyra was going to leave Hugh Hammer to defend the Dragonpit just in case anything weird happened there with Vermithor, and he did not do that, meaning that the Dragonpit is currently undefended. The Dance of the Dragons is the chief reason why there are no living dragons during Night of the Seven Kingdoms many years later in the timeline. The Maesters refer to this period as the death of the dragons. Daemon saw it in his Weirwood vision that the Three-Eyed Raven sent him. All those dead dragons are a reference to what's happening in this part of the timeline.
It's all a story, and you're but one part in it.
Number 7, the other new characters the show might introduce are Archmaester Gyldayn, who was the maester who wrote the Fire and Blood book in-universe, the history of the Targaryen family that they're adapting for the actual House of the Dragon show. They also used accounts from Mushroom, the court fool, but he was only a small cameo in Season 1, so I'm not expecting a ton of Mushroom in Season 4. That might be another book change too, where you don't hear a lot from Mushroom in the actual recording of these events so that they make it into the book. There are a number of other big characters from this period in the books too. There's Perkin the Flea, who we thought might be Ormund's man inside the Green's castle guard who was killing the Gold Cloaks. They could still do another version of Perkin the Flea and just say it's somebody else. Then there's Gaiman Palehair, really important character who is Aegon's bastard from Season 1 that we saw living in Fleet Bottom, who'd be much older at this point. Bloody Ben, Benjicott Blackwood, who's the head of House Blackwood during this period in the books. There's the Caltrops, who are a group of nobles who band together plotting to kill Ulf White for burning Tumbleton with Silverwing. This might be another example of a group on the show that they change and substitute characters already on the show, like John Roxton, Gawain Hightower, instead of his uncle Hobart Hightower, who was Ormund Hightower's father. On the show, Hobart is already dead, so there are already a couple of candidates on the show for really big noble characters, really highborn characters who might become the Caltrops. Number 6, the show won't do the second Battle of Tumbleton the way it happens in the books. They'll still have to adapt important parts of that fight in other ways, which is meant to resolve the Dragonseeds betrayal subplot. And remember, they didn't really do anything with that at the end of the finale, so they have to address that at the beginning of Season 4. But it is meant to be the culmination of the Dragonseeds subplot, so they'll have to wrap up Ulf White, Hugh Hammer, and Adam's storylines. They'll also probably use this to wrap up Daeron's and Tessarion's storyline too. Remember, we didn't know what happened to Daeron at the end of the season, just nowhere to be found. We didn't even see him flying on Tessarion, so we'll probably see that at the very beginning of Season 4. I don't actually think that they would kill Daeron off-screen or Tessarion off-screen either. This is why I think the two of them will still be alive at the beginning of Season 4, Episode 1. Number 5, they'll pay off Aegon's new plot to reclaim the Iron Throne with Aemond and Vhagar's help. Their next part of the plan was to find Vhagar, go to Tumbleton, put Ormund and Daeron right under his thumb again, then take the Greens and their 3 dragons that Aegon knew about at the time to take King's Landing and the Iron Throne back from Rhaenyra. But now because of the chaos that's happened at Tumbleton, the Hightowers are mostly dead, not all of them, but mostly, and things are in shambles. Ormund is also dead. And I think it's going to take them a little bit to actually find Vhagar, a couple of episodes, so he's not flying to King's Landing for at least a couple of episodes. And you have to remember that Aemond was not there at King's Landing when Aegon storms the Iron Throne. So the show has to create a reason for Aemond to either stay or go back to Harrenhal with Alys Rivers, which I think is pretty easy the way they've set up his subplot with Alys Rivers. Number 4, when Aegon goes to Tumbleton and King's Landing, after Aemond is reunited with Vhagar, he chooses instead to return to Harrenhal with Alys Rivers and her coming baby because she said, "I'll give you a son." So I think the idea is that she's pregnant at the end of Season 3. And because she can't leave the Riverlands, part of her curse is that she can't leave this area of Westeros, is that Daemon will come to try and kill him to end his threat, because people will be complaining, hey, there's this giant dragon flying around, can you do something about this? Daemon also still wants to kill Aegon, Sunfyre, Aemond, and Vhagar because they are threats to Rhaenyra. So this is why Aemond is still around Harrenhal in the God's Eye for Daemon to come fight with Caraxes above the God's Eye. But in the books, Alys Rivers survives the Dance of the Dragons, and when forces come to Harrenhal after the whole Battle of the God's Eye and the dance, they find her with the dragon, and it's not Vhagar, it's a new dragon nobody has seen before. But the books don't really expand on this plot point at all, or what happens to Alys Rivers, or her baby, her pregnancy with Aemond, making it sound like one of her 5 dragon eggs left by Dreamfire and the old Princess Rhaenyra will hatch as a result of her magic and Aemond's blood. And if they really want to get crazy with the references and parallels for the original show, they could draw a parallel for Daenerys' sacrifice and the blood magic that allowed her 3 dragons to hatch. Khal Drogo and her baby Rhaego were her sacrifice, and Aemond might become Alys Rivers' sacrifice after the battle over the God's Eye.
She uncovered incantations more ancient than the land. She treated with things that lived in the forest.
And maybe if one of those 5 dragon eggs winds up hatching, it winds up being the dragon of Aemon's son with her, because she said that she was going to be pregnant with a son. But that still raises all kinds of questions, because what happens to them by the events of the main Game of Thrones series, if she's supposed to still be alive during that period? We'll address that in a second. Number 3, they will definitely do the battle over the God's Eye. People have been hyping this up since season 1, since they announced they were going to do the show. Aemond versus Daemon on their dragons, fighting over the God's Eye. We spent some time on the God's Eye in season 3, like actually on the island. Ulfwhite, Hugh Hammer, and Adam were camped there waiting for Aemond for days, freaking Ulfwhite out because they kept seeing the green men who were in order living there to care for the weirwoods. Helaena also told Aemond in season 2 she saw him dying swallowed up by the God's Eye, which is what she was talking about. And it's also woven into her tapestry too, like he's lying inside what looks like the middle of a fetus or blood or an eye, which is probably a reference to him dying over the God's Eye. But here's the thing, you have to remember the timeline of the final season. They probably want to keep Matt Smith on the show as long as possible, so this will happen later in the season. And the battle over the God's Eye is happening in the books around the same time the storming of the Dragonpit is happening, so they might also push the storming of the Dragonpit towards the end of season 4. We will see how they pace this out. I think Battle Over the God's Eye will either wind up being episode 6 or maybe like the very end of episode 5 and all of episode 6. But just remember, she's supposed to be pregnant with Aemond's son, and they have a dragon later in the timeline at Harrenhal, so you just kind of wonder what the show is going to do with them in that Harrenhal subplot after the actual dance itself. We'll see how they leave that off. But I do not think that she is secretly Melisandre because she's bound to the Riverlands. Melisandre is not. But Melisandre is canonically alive during this part of the timeline, just a little bit younger. Daemon's fate after the God's Eye is a mystery. His body was never found, but he saw himself drowning in the lake in the Weirwood vision, so it's also possible he just sinks to the bottom of the lake and that's why nobody found him. But I don't think he secretly goes north and becomes a White Walker or anything. There are a lot of crazy theories about what really happens to Daemon. We will see how the show interprets this. There might be a couple twists. Number 2, really big one, Rhaenyra has to die. Joffrey already told us how during the original Game of Thrones series years ago, but the show will probably change how that goes down and when it happens down in the timeline of season 4. Here's another big thing too, she probably won't die until like the very last episode. The reason why I say this is a really big deal is because number 1 WTF prediction is probably because the show won't do or will speedrun extremely fast everything that happens right after Rhaenyra's death in the Fire and Blood book, because there is a ton of really important things during the Dance of the Dragons that happen after Rhaenyra's death. Like the dance itself is not over with Rhaenyra's death. There's a lot that goes on right after that. But based on everything that Ryan Condal has said about the way they built the House of the Dragon show is that he views Rhaenyra as the lead character. Even though it's meant to be an ensemble, it's really about Rhaenyra's story. And I think that when Rhaenyra's story is done, Ryan Condal feels like the show is done. So there's all kinds of cool stuff like the Hour of the Wolf, the Cregan Stark that they might not do or speedrun. They might speedrun what happens with Rhaenyra's children and Helena's daughter Jaehaera because there's a lot of really important history there and how the realm picks up the pieces in general after the dance. But be prepared for that. I think there'll be a little bit of connective tissue at the end of the show in like a montage, like very quick seconds, like brief seconds, blink and you'll miss it, that will connect it with what happens later during Night of the Seven Kingdoms in the timeline. But we're talking about like the last seconds of the finale. This is always a little controversial, but Ryan Condal's exact quote this week after the finale aired was, "For me, necessary changes in the translation of something from one medium to another seem less controversial. People have to understand that I have 200 pages of prose to work with to make 4 seasons of television, and this stuff, believe me, keeps me up at night more than anybody. But between seasons 2 and season 3, I just realized that I can't live like this anymore, just worrying about every little thing. I have to trust my instincts as somebody who's read Fire and Blood probably more than anybody else on the planet at this point, and I still regard this adaptation as tremendously faithful to the overall text and broad story that it's telling, even when there are individual moments that are surprising or different." Meaning what he's saying is that there are going to be a lot of book changes in season 4. So be prepared for it to be very different from the Fire and Blood book. One of the other funnier asides that Ryan Condal had, this is like an offhanded quote, so like this isn't going to be text to the show or anything like that. This is him just having fun in an interview where he was asked who the best ruler of Westeros during this period would be, and he actually said Alicent of all people. His exact quote was, "There's not a character on the show that has seen more of a differential between power to lack of power. She's seen it all. She doesn't ride a dragon," which I think is probably important for a sane and stable leader, mentally stable, but I think where she is now, where we find her in the story, and certainly where I think she's going, she's a person that has the proper experience and training to make the right choices. Make of that what you will heading into the final season. And because the show makes such a big deal about the prophecy of the long night season to season, the prophecy the prince who was promised, I think we will at least see the Night King and the White Walkers one time in some way by the end of the season to sort of reference what happens later in the timeline in maybe one more depiction, one more vision of Daenerys in the future. Because the show also has to address how the prophecy is lost over time to people. People forget about it because Rhaenyra just told an entire crowd full of people, and a couple of them do speak High Valyrian and probably understood what she was saying. So there are a couple people that walk away from this season knowing the prophecy. So they have to explain how people forget about it by the events of the main show. Later in the timeline, canonically, we know that Rhaegar Targaryen learns about it, and he's like the next person that we know about, but that's much later in the timeline. Also, the prophecy is etched on the Valyrian dagger, and currently Aemond has it, so they have to explain what happens to the Valyrian dagger at the end of this season, because eventually that falls into Rhaegar's hands too. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below and all your big predictions for Season 4 and how they're going to end the show. They'll be starting production on Season 4 soon, so we should get some more footage from the set once they do. I'll do more videos for Season 4 episodes as soon as we do actually get a look at what's going on episode to episode. In the meantime, we're about to get Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 2 episodes. That'll be like our next big thing that I'll be doing videos for week to week, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. I've already done a couple Season 2 videos for that. Click here for that, and click here for all my other House of the Dragon episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.